Okay, so let's run through these here real quick and kind of do these together. Here we go with number 1. Okay, so I'll just kind of run through these step by step, and you let me know what you think the answers are. So let's start off right here. I'm going to go add these up from left to right. Negative 4 plus negative 17 is? Negative 21, I agree. And then I've got negative 21 plus 12 plus negative 7. So what's negative 21 plus 12? Negative 9. Just shout it out. Hey, you know, every now and then I make mistakes with these kinds of things. You probably do too. It's okay if you make a mistake. I just want to get you guys going, get the math blood flowing. So what's negative 9 plus negative 7? So if you got negative 16 for number 1, I think we all agree. I think we're in pretty good shape. Okay, number 2. Some subtraction. The first thing I noticed with number 2 is that on the end there, I've got that minus a negative 9. So maybe you remember from before, maybe you saw in your quiz there was one part like this. Whenever you see minus a negative whatever, what is that really? Positive. Plus a positive. So I'm going to do that right away, plus a positive. So let's start there on the left. 12 minus a positive 25. What do you guys think that is? It's negative 13, agreed. So negative 13 plus a positive 9. And what is negative 13 plus positive 9? So if you got negative 4 for number 2, I think we're doing pretty good. If you didn't get negative number 4, maybe negative 4 for number 2, maybe make a note of it. And if you want to talk about how we got to that, happy to do so. All right, number 3 is an evaluate. So this is what we were working on last week, right? This is one of our newer concepts. And so we're going to do order of operations. You can see there's all kinds of stuff. There's absolute values, there's exponents, there's parentheses, and all kinds of things. Maybe you did this, I hope you didn't, but one of the most common mistakes would be to read this from left to right. Remember, in math, when you got a mix of operations, we definitely don't read from left to right. We read according to PEMDAS. And so if somebody did this, can you see how somebody would be like, oh, 9 minus 7, that's 2. Do you see why that's a mistake? Yeah. They've gone out of order of operations, and so we don't want to do that. What I want to do is look at the parentheses first and do any work inside there. So my first step would be 9 minus 7, parentheses, 4 squared is 16, got 16 minus 11. And then the absolute values are somewhat of a grouping symbol as well. So I'm going to do the work in there as well. So 5 minus 9 is negative 4, and that would be my first step. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here. I'm still not going to do the 9 minus 7 because that's going to be one of the last things I do. 16 minus 11 is 5. Minus, what's the absolute value of negative 4? 4. So it's just going to be minus 4 there. So I've taken care of the work in the parentheses. Now I'm down to multiplication or division. Is there any multiplication or division going on here? Where is it? 7 times 5, right? There's no symbol there. The 7 is just kind of backed up to the parentheses. That means 7 times 5. So 7 times 5, of course, is 35. And now we are just down to addition and or subtraction. So let's work this out. I'm just going to go from left to right at this point because I am down to just that single step. What is 9 minus 35?
Negative 26.
That is right. And what about negative 26 minus 4?
Negative 30.
So if you got negative 30 for number 3, I think you're in good shape. If you didn't, we can go back and kind of trace through and see where maybe you made a little mistake, and perhaps we could fix that. And the last one, is reading a graph, understanding the meaning of a graph. This says, what is the value of 25-year-old machinery? So what I would do here is I would find 25 years on the graph. It's right about there. I would try to trace that up similar to the way they did. I'd get to right about there. I'm coming up with about $25,000. Does that sound about right? Graphs sometimes are a little bit hard to read. Please, whatever you do in a situation like this, don't look at it and be like, oh man, you know what, it looks like it's $25,000-ish. So I'm going to go with $25,013. It's kind of hard to argue with that, right? And because can anybody get in there with a ruler and be like, oh, you know, that's hard to say because we probably could prove that it really is $25,000. What I would suggest here is just go with the simplest possible answer, If it looks like 25,000, go with 25,000. Don't go with 25,000.02 or something like that. Anyway, so we cover all four of those. In other words, I did them in front of you, and that might not mean anything as far as you understanding. I hope that all of you went 4 out of 4 here, and you're like, oh, let's just do the quiz right now. But does anybody have any questions? Is there anything that I can help you with? Maybe that order of operations, maybe something went wrong there. You're not sure what. Maybe that graph doesn't make any sense, or maybe it almost makes sense. Any questions at all? This is a safe place for you to voice any concerns or questions. It's really tough for me when I don't find out you're struggling until the quiz, right? Go ahead, Ava.
Since graphs depend on how you interpret it, if you put like 26,000 or 24,000 or something, would that be wrong?
You know, in a situation like this, it's going to be tough to be for sure, right? So, you know, I don't even know if it's a question of interpretation. It's just a question of, you know, it's like, is this perfectly vertical and perfectly horizontal? You know, if I gave you a grid, like if there was a grid on the back of the graph, you know what I mean, like with all the little grid lines, I would probably be a little more stringent.
Yeah.
You know, I'd be like, hey, you know, those lines all lined up pretty nicely. But in a situation like this where it's like there's no grid lines, it is hard. I'd have to give you a little grace probably if it were just like this one.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I try to be reasonable. And like I was saying, it's like if somebody put 25,013, I have a hard time arguing with that, right? Be like, it looks like it could be because the scale is so huge. So yeah, I would definitely be, in this exact scenario, yeah, I'd be pretty reasonable. But with the grid, I think you could probably be right on the money. Yeah. Good question. Other questions, concerns? And her question is more along the lines of like, how would I be assessed, right? Like, how would I be graded on my knowledge of how to deal with a graph? Makes sense. Makes sense for sure. Anyone else? We could do, yeah, Ben.
We have to show our work like for number 1 and 2 on the quiz.
So I would say 1 and 2 because it's a single step. Like it's basically just addition or subtraction, like a single step on the order of operations. Like if you could just go left, left, right, left, and negative 16, I'm fine with that.
Right.
Like if you showed no steps on 1 and 2, I think that's pretty reasonable. I think that's a bit unreasonable on 3.
Yeah.
I think that would be setting you up for failure for me to be like, yeah, no steps needed. Just do some magic in your head. And it's definitely doable. I'm pretty sure I could do it, but I'm pretty sure if I did it in my head, I'd make some mistakes. And I'd assume probably the same for you guys as well. And I want to set you up for success. So if there's multiple steps, let's go with multiple steps. If it's one step, you can do it, do it. No problem. Great questions. Anybody else? I think these are all very, very good questions I didn't really address already, so I'm glad you asked. Okay, you know the good news is, if this didn't go well, you're going to get a chance tomorrow and Wednesday to improve. All right? We good? All right, flip over. We're going to do some work here together. Today I've got 3 examples for you, and then I have some 3 practice questions for you guys to do on your own. Here we go. I think. There we go. Okay. So on Thursday of last week and a little bit on Wednesday, we looked at order of operations. We looked at PEMDAS. And before you race ahead, I'm going to show you some really good steps. Oh my gosh, Josh, you know the good news is, hold on, you've already made a mistake. And so I think my method is going to help you. I really do. You might have made a mistake. It could be the way I'm reading it, but that's a problem. Here's a problem. If I'm reading it wrong, someone who's been doing math like this for 26 years, you have the problem, not me. So you want to make sure that you're writing this so I can read it. I've got a very good system to help you avoid real mistakes or fake mistakes or potential mistakes, right? Yeah? Here we go. So we're going to be evaluating. I want to be really clear about this, and I'm not joking. I want to make sure that we're using good terminology. Evaluate is the direction here. Evaluate is not the same thing as solve. Sometimes we use the word solve as just I did something, I finished, I completed something. We're like, I solved it. The truth is, we'll talk about this a little bit more as we get into Unit 2 somewhat later on down the road. But you can't solve something that doesn't have an equal sign. Do you see any equal signs? Do you see an equation? I don't see an equation. So there is no way we can solve that. There's nothing to be solved. There's no solutions to make this true because there's no equation. The only thing we can really do is evaluate this. And all evaluate means is find the value of. Find the value of. So let me give you a for instance. Let me tell you why this is an important step. Let's say that I owned a company and I was hiring, and you came to me and you were wanting a job. You gave me your resume, and I'm like, I'm impressed. I think I'd like to hire you. And you say, okay, yeah, I'd love to work for you, but I am kind of curious what the salary would be, what I'd be paid to work here. I'm like, oh, no problem. You will be paid in dollars, US dollars, and I will pay you 11x plus $4 per day. 11x plus 4. What would you say? 11x plus 4. Does that sound good? 11x plus $4 per day? Say again?
What is that?
Wouldn't you want to know what x was? Because if x was like 0.001, you're like, oh, that's terrible, right? If x was -5, well, now you're paying me to work for me, right? If x was 1,000, now you're like, tell me where to sign, right? That's a pretty good salary per day, right? $4,000 per day. You're like, oh, this is the greatest pay ever. Yay, especially since I'm only like 14 or 15 years old. So if I were to tell you, your value to me as an employee is 4x plus 11, wouldn't you be like, well, what is x? Like you said, Chase. And wouldn't your value really depend on what x is? Depending on what x is, you'd either be like, yeah, I'd like to work for you, or I don't really think I want to work for you anymore, right? And so that's what we're doing here. We're evaluating. And I say, evaluate this expression, negative x squared plus minus 5x plus 13. We don't know exactly what that value is until we know what x is supposed to be, and you're told that. Does that make sense? So here's how we go about doing this. Anytime you're asked to evaluate an expression, it's got variables in it, here is your first step. And I would encourage you to do this every single time. This is one of your best ways to avoid making frustrating mistakes. What you want to do is you want to replace every single variable with an empty set of parentheses. Maybe you've seen this before. If you have, the reason is because it works. Does this guarantee you won't miss anything? Nope. You still might make a silly mistake, but this sets you up for success, especially with exponents. Especially with exponents.
You didn't allow me to finish writing.
I know. That's Josh, I'm not looking for a justification here. I just want you to do it right. I want you to get 100%. Okay? I've seen this work well. All right, so you replaced all of your x's with empty parentheses. Once you've done that, just drop in whatever the value of x is supposed to be. Drop that into the empty parentheses. The parentheses make a huge difference. So if I drop in a -2 here and here, now I'm set up for success. Does this make sense? From here on out, I want to ask you, does this not look like the order of operations questions we did last week and ones we did for the warm-up today? These are the exact same kind of things. So we're going to follow the order of operations. I am not going to go from left to right necessarily. I'm going to look for order of operations. Do you guys see any work inside parentheses that we need to do? No, there's none. Do you see any exponents that we could do? Yes. There's one. Yep, it's right here. So I've got -2 inside parentheses squared. What's that?
4.
It's 4, but there's still that negative hanging out in the front, right? So the negative doesn't go anywhere. We haven't done anything with that. But -2 inside parentheses squared is 4. So that first term is -4. -5 times -2 plus 13. I've done all my exponents. The next thing coming up is multiplication or division. You guys see any multiplication or division?
5? Yes.
Yeah, I've got that 5 times -2, or you could think of it as -5 times -2. Either way, it's going to work out just fine. I'm going to think of it as -5 times -2. So what is -5 times -2? Positive 10. I still got that plus 13 hanging on the end there. And as I look to finish this up, the only thing left is addition and subtraction. So what's -4 plus 10? And 6 plus 13 would finish with 19. So what is the value of -x squared minus 5x plus 13? Well, when x is -2, the value is 19. That make sense? So key steps here. The empty parentheses is what we put in here. And then you drop this in. Once you do that, then it's just PEMDAS from there on out. This is where it's getting... I need to adjust my screen. It's a little bit too big there. This is where it's getting really, really important for you to understand the showing of orderly, understandable steps. I'm going to go with that, I guess. You want me to be able to look at your page and understand exactly what you did. So can you guys take a mental picture of that? Mental picture in place? Got it?
Yeah.
So I want you to picture yourself as maybe like someone trying to understand what you did. And then check this out real quick. What if instead of that, we had, I don't know, something like this?
I don't like that. It's not as hopeful.
So the answer was 19, right? And what this person has done, like if you followed, they've kind of done some stuff, right? Like you see the -4 hanging out there?
Jeez.
You see the -4? So like that actually is a right number, kind of, sort of for that first term, right? And you see how the next one, I've got a 6. Isn't that the -4 plus the 10 that we had before?
Yeah.
And then they got a 13 hanging out right there. And I can see maybe that 13 came from like right there. But then they get 17. So wouldn't it be fair to say that they've probably just made a really simple error? They said that 6 plus 13 is 17 instead of what it should have been, 19. But do you see how this is going to be borderline impossible for me to award any credit for? I'm going to look at this and be like, well, what does -4 have to do with anything? Well, maybe it's the first term, I guess. The 6, what in the world is the 6? You know, like, I'm just simply going to read what you wrote. I'm not going to fill in all the lines in between. We're like, oh, I know what they did. They did this. So well, you know, I'm going to literally look at what you wrote. And if what you wrote doesn't make sense, I really can't award credit in good conscience. I can't be like, well, somebody else over here, they showed awesome steps and they made one little mistake, so we'll give them like 3 out of 4 because they pretty much knew what they were doing. I look at this and I'm like, 17 and nothing really makes sense? We got an issue. You're going to go like 0 for 3, 0 for 4, whatever. There's going to be no partial credit on some summative assessment. But remember that mental picture you took earlier? Do you see how if I made a simple mistake, you could look at it and be like, oh my goodness, everything is so beautiful except this one step. They made this really silly little mistake. So here's the point. I do not know what you're used to. But as we get more and more into the algebraic concepts that are out in front of us, I am going to become far more interested in your logic and your communication than I am in just getting the right answer. Because that's always the argument. The argument is, Mr. Anderson, I got the right answer. And I might come back at you and be like, yeah, but you know what? No, I might come back at you and be like, listen, I don't care very much. Because your steps make no sense. Seriously.
Stop.
I'm totally serious. If you know later on, if you get a test back or whatever and I mark something wrong, you're like, but I got the right answer. I'm going to be like, well, that's neat and everything, but none of your steps make any sense at all. You just magically got this answer. I'm going to be looking at your steps just as much, if not more than, the final result in most cases. That makes sense? So please make sure you're communicating well. Remember, that's one of those skills I want you to take away from this class. Can I communicate? Can I be logical? It's really important that you be able to do that just as much, if not more, than the right answer. Okay, number 2, we'll go through these a little bit quicker here because I've kind of set the stage for us. Here we go. Whenever you are asked to evaluate, that means find the value of, and we have no idea what the value is until you know what x is. So I'm going to replace all of my x's with empty parentheses. So it's going to be minus empty parentheses, 5 minus empty parentheses, and then 3 minus empty parentheses squared minus absolute value of 6 times empty parentheses. So again, just look at what I've done there. Anytime I saw a variable, I've replaced it with an empty set of parentheses. And once I've replaced it with an empty set of parentheses, I'm then going to take that -1, which I know what x is, and I'm going to put it in there. So -1 goes here, here, and there. That empty parentheses is a really important step. Going to go through some challenging order of operations now. We got some parentheses, and we definitely have some work to be done in there. So I've got 5 minus -1. Inside those parentheses, I'm going to do this first because it's got an exponent in there. What is -1 inside the parentheses squared?
1.
Positive 1. Yep, so this is just going to be 3 minus 1 minus absolute value. What's 6 times -1?
Negative.
Okay, we're doing good. Any questions so far? I've just done a little tiny step inside the parentheses. And if you struggle at all, I would encourage you guys to do little tiny steps. Right? I'm doing some pretty small steps here. I think this would be good advice, especially if you're struggling. Okay, 5 minus negative 1. Doing the work in the parentheses here first. What's 3 minus 1? Of course, that's 2. What is the absolute value of negative 6?
6.
So we end up with minus 6 on the end. Okay, I'm down to doing some multiplication, division, because I've done all the work in the parentheses. I've done all the exponents. What's 5 minus negative 1, really? 5 plus 1. So should I just write 6?
No.
Oh, that would be messing it up, wouldn't it? Order of operations. Yeah, so what I'm going to do here is I'll just put 5 plus positive 1 still times 2 minus 6. And now I'll do my multiplication. 1 times 2 is 2. So I get 5 plus 2 minus 6. And after all of that, the final value is?
1.
Yeah, 5 plus 2 is 7. 7 minus 6 is 1. Yowzers, that's a lot of steps, right? You might be able to do it faster, and that's okay, but make sure you're showing logical steps along the way. You guys have any questions on that one? Definitely a tougher one. Yeah, go ahead, Noah.
So question, when
Yes.
I was doing the work on mine, I multiplied negative 1 times 2 and I didn't change the absolute value until it was lower and I got the same answer instead of 2.
Yeah, so timing is not necessarily going to make a difference. I think what you're talking about, so like you did, you multiplied here before you did the minus. Minus is really a plus. As long as you keep this minus sign in place, that's no problem at all. No problem at all. And then this is just kind of hanging off the back end, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
And so if you waited a step or two to evaluate that, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay.
I think that makes sense. And definitely nothing illogical about that. Anybody else with a question? Thank you, Noel. Appreciate it. Okay, so then my final example for you guys here this morning is right here. It's number 3. And this is a fraction. This is kind of like what we finished with last time, except it's more of this evaluate style like we've been doing here this morning. So here we go. This says evaluate. It's a fraction when x is negative 2. So just like we did before, what I'm going to do is replace any variable I see with empty parentheses. So it's going to be 3 empty parentheses squared minus absolute value 2 plus empty parentheses over empty parentheses to the third power plus 3 parentheses empty parentheses minus 5. So really, it should look exactly like the step above it, except empty parentheses where there were x's before, or any variable for that matter. All right, I'm going to replace the emptiness in those parentheses with whatever x is supposed to be, negative 2 in this case. So negative 2 goes here, 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 and there. Okay, starting to see a good system here, I hope. Hope it's making sense. All right, so I'm going to treat the numerator of the fraction kind of like its own little evaluation, denominator like its own little evaluation. We'll kind of see how it goes from there, and we'll finish it out. So in the numerator, I see some work to be done in the parentheses, in the grouping symbols at least. So 3 times negative 2 squared plus, inside those absolute values, I've got 2 plus negative 2. What's that? 0. And what's the absolute value of 0? Wow, I can just get rid of that altogether. So I'll get rid of that plus sign. Leave that alone. So that numerator just got a lot easier. Down below, I do see more work in the parentheses. So I got negative 2 cubed plus 3 parentheses. What's negative 2 minus 5?
Negative 7.
I've got negative 7 right there. Pause for a second. Look at what I've done. Technically, this is minus 0 up here. Okay, so I've done all the work in the parentheses. Now I'm down to exponents. So for my exponents, I've got negative 2 inside parentheses squared, and that would be 4. So 3 times 4. And then down here I've got negative 2 in parentheses to the third. What's that? Negative 8. Good job. So negative 8 plus 3 times negative 7. Okay, and then, oops. Coming over here to finish up. 3 times 4 in the numerator is just 12. I'm down to my multiplication division. In the denominator, I've got 3 times negative 7. And what's that?
Negative 21.
All right. So this is going to come out to be a pretty interesting answer. Denominator ends up being negative 29. So I've got 12 over negative 29. You could also write that as just negative 12 29ths. since a positive divided by a negative is just a negative, you could rewrite it like that. I would take either one of those. Either one of those is totally fine. Okay. Definitely a step up from what we've been doing. I want you guys to do a little bit of practicing. I think I'm going to have some of you in groups go to the board and show some examples of these. But I do want you guys to flip over, take a look at the practice questions, starting, of course, with number 1. Ready, set, go. Answer up here. The value here is 35. Yeah, we had Ava. Colton did a nice job. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Aiden is just, hang on just a second. Don't do the magic erase thing yet. She's just wrapping it up, and you feel free to wrap it up. It's okay. I'm going to start working through a couple of steps here. So here we go. I'm going to replace all of my variables with empty parentheses, and we'll see where Whit finished up here. And 4 to the parentheses minus, and I've got negative parentheses 4 squared. Hey, let's decide. You know what we haven't decided yet? What the right actual evaluation is. Let's decide that right now. Here we go. So I've got all my empty parentheses in there. I'm going to replace them with a 2. So a 2 goes in here, here, and here. And I'm going to go through and do my order of operations. So I'm going to work inside the parentheses first. Inside the parentheses, I've got 3 minus 2. So 3 minus 2 squared. So I think we're okay there. He put a negative 2 right here. It's not going to really make a difference because we're about to square it anyways. But 2 squared and negative 2 squared, they're both 4. So it's 3 minus 4. And then 4 squared minus over here. So Aiden, this is where I think you made a little mistake. I think you had...
I'm so lost. I don't know what I did.
I know what you did. So you had negative 2 minus 4. Do you see your very first step?
Yeah.
And you multiplied those two together and got 8.
Oh.
But it's really negative 2 minus 4, not times negative 4. So this should be negative 6
Got it.
squared.
Whoa.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Then if I continue on with the order of operations, I get 3 minus 4 is negative 1. So I agree with Whit on that.
I just got it.
Now I am down to just my exponents. So, well, I'll do the absolute value. What's the absolute value of negative 1? 1. So this is just negative 1. My exponents would be 4 squared, which is 16, minus, what's negative 6 inside parentheses squared? Positive 36. But we still have this minus, so it's really minus 36. That might have been what you were talking about. Finally, down to just addition, subtraction. Negative 1 plus 16 is 15. 15 minus 36, Whit. You nailed it. Negative 21.
Yes, we did.
Negative 21. Okay. So are you starting to see how practice is very necessary here? Practice makes permanent. So make sure your practice is good. Okay, we got time for our last one here real quick. So let's take a look at number 3. And it would be right here. This is kind of like the last one we did. I want you guys to try this one. And what I'm going to say is, between our final 2 tables here, if any one or more than one of you want to come up and show us what you did, we would love to see it. Number 3. We're doing number 3. We're not going to have time to do that right now. We'll do number 3.
Over negative 5. I don't know.
Hey guys, before we go, can I show you this real quick? Yeah. Okay, here we go. So let's see who got it up here. We got 2 parentheses cubed minus 5 parentheses all over the whole thing, the whole denominator's in absolute values.
We can't see what's happening.
Sorry. Let me unfreeze. Okay.
I don't know.
So I've replaced all of my variables with empty parentheses, just like I've done on all the others. I'm going to put the negative 1 here where it goes. Okay. So in the numerator, I'm going to write this. What's negative 1 in parentheses cubed?
Negative 4.
So it'd be 2 times negative 1 minus 5 times negative 1. In the denominator, I'm I do have work in the parentheses. I know we're up against our time. Give me just a second here. In those parentheses, what's -1 minus 1?
I got it, it's fine.
-2.
Did anyone know?
No, I didn't even do it.
I was supposed to do that.
In the numerator, all I have left is multiplication. I get -2 plus 5. Please don't pack up yet. Hold on. In the denominator, 4 times -1 is -4. And then -2 in the parentheses is 4. And here we go. -2 plus 5 is 3. In the denominator, -4 minus 4 is -8. What's the absolute value of -8?
8.
So I end up with 3/8, which does agree. Hey, look, both of them. Who was that up there? I didn't see. It was Coy and who? Ben?
I had it first.
Nailed the right answer, that's for sure. All right.
Wrote it down first.
Hope you guys have a great day. See you tomorrow.